Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alright, so just to recap what we mentioned last time. So we're talking about the amil, if you remember. The idea of this guy or a group of people who are appointed to collect zakat. Alright, so we said this individual also gets zakat as well. And the reason for that is because his getting the zakat is for the work that he's doing. And we know that zakat collection itself facilitates the poor person to receive the zakat. Okay, so وَفِي الرِّقَابِ. So the next one is قَالَ وَفِي الرِّقَابِ. And a person who is in the riqab. So what does riqab mean? So riqab is from the word raqaba. And this refers specifically to أن يعان المكاتبون منها في فك رقابهم. So فك رقاب, it's referring to freedom, emancipation. Yeah, so releasing their necks. The idea is that the mukatab, there's 4 types of slaves. You have something called a full slave, which is a normal slave. You have something which is known as an walad. An walad is a female slave where the master has had intimacy with her. She's given birth, and then the master has claimed that the child is his. So the master must claim the child is his in order for the child to be considered to be his child, basically. So he claims the child is his, and then what happens? So in this case, the child will now be considered to be the master's, it's free, and the slave woman, she'll become free as well. But not now, but when the master dies. So she is known as al-Walad, mother of the child. And then you have a mudabbar. Mudabbar is someone who the master has attached its freedom to an event like death. So the master says, when I die, you're free. And the 4th one is a mukatab. Mukatab is a slave that has come into a financial agreement with the master that if the slave was to pay a certain sum of money, the master will set the slave free. This is known as a mukatab. And in the Quran, Allah mentions about this, كَاتِبُوهُمْ إِنْ عَلِمْتُمْ فِيهِمْ خَيْرٌ. So the idea is that this individual now is considered to be someone who is trying to collect money to get its freedom. So either he's going to get his freedom by working or by people donating. So he is a person who can be given zakat. So he says, وَفِي الرِّقَابِ أَنْ يُعَانَ الْمُكَاتَبُونَ. So this is where the mukatabs are supported financially minha في رقابهم من الزكاة من الصدقات في فك رقابهم, in freeing themselves, in getting freedom. So he says وهو المنقول. This is what has been transmitted. So this is what has been transmitted. So in other words, this has been transmitted could mean this has been transmitted in hadith, or this could mean that this has been transmitted from the scholars from the early years. And we mentioned about this last week, if you remember. There was a little hashi over here that we went through a bit. Okay, so you guys can read through that if you like. Next, wal gharim. So the gharim, now fi fakir riqab, although he hasn't mentioned it over here, is it possible to be able to say that riqab also refers to people who are captured by the enemy, and then the money is used to free them? So freeing prisoners of war. So over here, this is something which is not mentioned. However, this is something which some of the scholars have opened a discussion regarding. So if the idea of fakku riqab is to emancipate someone in slavery, then to pay for someone's emancipation who has been captured in a war, there seems to share the same sort of a reason over there. Okay. وَالْغَارِمْ مَنْ لَزِمَهُ دَيْنٌ وَلَا يَمْلِكُ نِصَابًا فَاضِلًا عَنْ دَيْنِهِ. And as for the gharim, okay, one second, let me just check for this riqab issue. Riqab. Okay, so let me just show you guys. I'm going to show you guys Tafsir Ruh al-Ma'ani. Yeah, because this is a verse of the Quran, obviously. So Tafsir Ruh al-Ma'ani should have. وفي الرقاب روح المعاني. Let me show you guys as well. Okay, so قال سبحانه في الرقاب. In fact, Surah Tawbah. Okay, I know. 1 second. Let's go to another Quran. Okay, this site's better. Okay, this site is this site I usually use just dedicated to the Quran. وفي الرقاب. Okay, Ruh al-Ma'ani. Okay, so he says this is not the right ayah. توبة. إنما صدقات للفقراء مساكين مؤلفة القلوب. So here he has a good discussion on مؤلفة القلوب. You guys can check out. في الرقاب أي للصرف في فك الرقاب بأن يعاني المكاتبون بشيء منها على أداء نجومهم. Yeah, so this is نجوم means like the installments. وقيل بأن يبتاع منها الرقاب فتعتق. So some have even said you can actually buy slaves. This is not the Hanafi position, but some have said you can actually, with the zakat money, actually buy slaves of their masters with the zakat money and free them. وَقِيلَ بِأَنْ يُفْتَ الْأُسَارَةِ. And some have said that you can use zakat money to free captives. Yeah, and then he mentions وَإِلَى الْأَوَّلْ ذَهَبَ النَّخْعِي وَاللَّيْثُ وَالزُّهْرِي وَالْمَرِي وَعَلَيْهِ أَكْثَرُ الْفُقَهَاءِ وَإِلَى الثَّانِي ذَهَبَ مالك. Malik has taken the other view that you can buy slaves and free them. عزاه وفي التفسير الطبري أن الأول هو المنقول والمنقول عنه. Yeah, so again, so see, there are some scholars who have actually discussed this because they're trying to look at, can this be extended to other scenarios as well as people who are. Okay, so okay, let's see if any Hanafis have mentioned this مسألة في الرقاب السارة. Okay, we'll leave that one. Anyway, let's go back to this. The point is, I just want to show you guys that some of the, like in today's contemporary world, some organizations have said that can it be given to freeing people who have been imprisoned unlawfully or unjustly. So قال وفي الرقاب والغارم. Okay, now who is a gharim? So he says من لزمه دين ولا يملك نصابا, someone who has adhered or has accrued a debt, ولا يملك نصابا, and does not possess a nisab from the 8 types of nisab, فاضلا عن دينه, which is in excess of his liabilities. So a gharim basically is someone who is in debt. So if, for example, like let's say there's a guy, he's got £10,000 of savings, but he's got £20,000 of debt and loans that he owes people. So the idea is that this money can be considered to be deducted. So you deduct the assets from the debts and then you see how much you've got. So in this case, if there's a guy who's got £10,000 of assets, £20,000 of debts, you minus the assets from the debts and you're left with minus 10,000. So this individual is called a gharim. Gharima is a person who has taken something upon a burden upon himself. Man lazimahu dayn wala yamliku nisaban, and does not own any of the nisabs after his debts have been deducted. So this is the common understanding that we take. Now, some of the Hanafis have also mentioned a second explanation for the gharim as well. So there's 2 explanations of the gharim. So you can find this in Bahr al-Ra'iq. Nearly everyone's mentioned it. And that is a person who has lent out money to people and can't get it back. They're not giving it back. So let's say, for example, I possess £10,000 and I borrowed to family members and other people money and they're not giving me back. So now, technically, because I don't have access to the money, that sort of means that I am technically poor. In that moment in time, I'm considered to be poor. So therefore, I would be considered to be someone who is a person who can take zakat. But is that because I am a faqir, or is that because I am a gharim? Remember, most of these categories are people who are considered to be faqir anyway. So most of the categories are based on faqr. This is where, if you want to read more about this, Bahr al-Ra'iq and Ibn Abidin, they discuss this in a lot more detail. And they go into whether this second type that I've just mentioned to you, does that really come under gharim or not? Is it type of gharim? And some Hanafis have even opened up the discussion and said that then, does that mean any individual who cannot get access to his money for some reason, let's say the banks have frozen your assets or something else, and you can't get access to your money, does that mean that now in that moment of time you can take zakat? That's where there's also a discussion over there. Yeah, because the idea of the gharim is someone who is basically, although he physically has assets, the liabilities outweigh the assets that he has. وقال الشافعي رحمه الله, and Imam Shafi رحمه الله says, من تحمل غرامة, someone who has taken the burden of a gharama. So gharama is like a kind of penalty. في إصلاح ذات البين, in rectifying ذات البين. So ذات البين refers to mending ties between people, whether that's family members or community members or tribes. So in the past, what used to happen was sometimes, let's say there's 2 tribes, there's 2 areas. For example, like let's say Aston and Small Heath, and they're not getting on with each other, they're fighting. So what a person might do, it might go to both sides and negotiate, like he's like the broker. He negotiates a deal between the 2. And then that negotiation involves him paying money to one of the sides or both sides. So that money that now he's burden taken on, because of that now he's technically considered to be in a kind of a debt. So this is why Imam Shafi says, would be considered to be a gharim as well. So تحمل غرامة في إصلاح ذات البين وإطفاء الثائرة بين القبيلتين. Itfa, it means to extinguish. Tha'ira, it means tha'ar, like a revenge or an enmity between 2 tribes. So again, this was like an olden days thing where tribes would get into a little bit of fight with each other, and then a negotiator would come, a third person, and he would try to broker a deal between the 2. And this negotiation might require him, again, spending money. So because Sahib al-Hidayah hasn't really responded to this, it seems as though Sahib al-Hidayah is inclined to this meaning being acceptable as well as a gharib, because that was like an understanding in the Arabic language in those days. So in the early years, in the Arabic language, they seem to understand the gharim actually came from this as well. Okay, so this is the gharim, the person who is in debt. Nowadays, there could be a person who is a millionaire, so they have millions of pounds, but they are in such a big debt that that debt is encompassing of all their assets, so therefore they are considered to be eligible to receive zakat. And if you remember, we discussed this as well when we talked about the idea of the ashir as well. And we said if there is an unjust ashir who takes money, or like a khawarij who take money, it's possible that they're taking the money could be permissible. Under what basis is it permissible? Because they have taken so much of people's money, they owe so much that they are technically considered to be in debt more than what they own. So in modern days, we have debts which are considered to be liabilities, but we have structured debts. So a structured debt is a debt where you owe, like let's say a bank, or you owe a financial institute, like student loans or mortgages, or even let's say you bought some things, and now over multiple years, many years, car or something, and you're paying off. This is what we call a long-term debt or long-term loan. So Mufti Taqi Usmani, he says that the long-term debts, these would not fall under liabilities, anything beyond what you owe in 1 year. So the 12-month window, whatever you owe in that 12-month window, you can use that as a liability, and technically you can come under a gharim in that sense. But otherwise, anything that you owe after the 12 months, like if you have a 10-year mortgage and year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, all the way to 10, that is still upon you, but you can't consider that to be part of your liability. So people like Mufti Taqi Usmani, he used the 1 year. Some people use 2 years, 3 years, depending on their reasoning. So that would not come under a gharim if it's a long term, but this would be a short term loan, or a loan which can be demanded at any point. Okay, next. وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and in the path of Allah. So what does it mean by in the path of Allah? Now, generally, when the word path of Allah is mentioned, path of Allah generally refers to multiple paths. Like there are lots of paths to Allah. And Imam Malik rahimahullah was asked, what does Sabilullah mean? So he says, Subulullahi kathira. The paths of Allah are many. Yeah, so paths of Allah could be studying knowledge is a path of Allah, fighting in a battle is a path of Allah, inviting people to Islam is a path of Allah, going to the masjid is a path of Allah, and so forth. These are all paths of Allah. But when the word path of Allah, Sabilullah, is mentioned unrestricted in the Quran, it generally refers to fighting in battle. That's what the general application for Sabilullah is. Yeah. So, وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ مُنْقَطِعَ الْغُزَاتِ عند Abi Yusuf. So, fi sabilillah refers to those people who are, those soldiers who are cut off from the war financially. So this could be someone, let's say, who's going for war. So let's say there's an announcement that's made, right guys, there's a battle going on, we need people to volunteer, just like nowadays in Ukraine against Russia, and civilians have to now enlist on the army too. And someone doesn't have enough money to go in the war, or doesn't have enough to buy weapons, then that individual is permitted to take zakat. That's what he says. So this is munqatil ghuzat. Or this could be someone who is actually in the war and their supplies have run out, and so that person needs financial aid. So zakat can be given to that individual as well. Yeah. So Imam Abu Yusuf, he says that this refers to munqatil ghuzat, the person who is in a battle. لأنه هو المتفاهم عند الإطلاق, because he says when you say Sabilullah, your mind automatically, the mutafahim, the thing that's understood, goes towards that when it's unconditionally mentioned. So in the Arabs, when they said Sabilullah, like in the early Muslims, when they said Sabilullah, the mind automatically went towards the soldiers. That's why he says, that's the reason why he believes Sabilullah is restricted to people who are related to military, people who are involved in the military. and nothing else. وَعِنْدَ Muhammad rahimahullah, and according to Imam Muhammad, munqati al-hajj. So he says no, it actually refers to munqati al-hajj, the person who is going for hajj and has lost all of his supplies. So he's on the way for hajj, he's lost his money, his money is finished. So that individual is permitted to take a zakat for that. Now, if you look in the Hashi over here, it has a little discussion about what is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa on this. So we know Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad. So he mentions Imam Saruji's statement. I'm going to read this. So he says, وَعِنْدَ مُحَمَّدٍ قَالَ السَّرُوجِ. So Saruji is a very well-known commentator on Hidayah. He's got a book called Ghayatul, I think it's called Al-Ghaya or something, Ghaya something. And it's just recently been printed, right? So it's recently printed. I think you can get it from Maktaba Ismail. It's very long, multiple volumes. He says, بعد أن عد جملة من كتب أصحابنا, after mentioning a list of Hanafi books, لم يذكر أحد منهم, none of these books that I've skimmed through have mentioned Abu Hanifa's qawl in this masala في سبيل الله. ثم قال فكشفت عن ذلك من نحو 30 مصنفا. I found out this after going through 30 books. فكيف لا يتكلم الإمام في معرفة في سبيل الله. How is it possible that Imam Hanifa was silent about في سبيل الله مع وقوع الحاجة إلى ذلك, despite there being a dire need to know that. وفي الوبر هو الحاج والغزاة المنقطعون. So Wabari says it's the Haji and the Ghuzat who are cut off from their wealth. وفي الإسبيجابي أراد به الفقراء. What he means by all of this is they have to still be poor in need. من أهل الجهاد ولم يحكي فيه خلافا. No one has mentioned any اختلاف on this. فيجوز أن يكون ذلك قول أبي حنيفة. Maybe that is why that is Abu Hanifa's qawl. Yeah, that in other words, it being for the people of jihad is that. وقال الكاكي منقطع الغزاة وهو المراد من قولهم وفي سبيل الله عند أبي حنيفة وأبي يوسف والشافعي ومالك. So Kaki actually attributes it to Abu Hanifa. وعند أحمد ومحمد منقطع الحاج. So Imam Ahmad and Imam Muhammad say it's referring to the Haji, the person who's gone for Hajj and his supplies have run out. ولم يبين في أي كتاب رأي أبي حنيفة مع أبي يوسف. Nowhere could you find it there. ولكن يحتمل أنه اطلع عليه في موضع حتى ذكره معه. But it's possible that Kaki has found somewhere, he's found a book and he has found Abu Hanifa's qawl there. So we have to be very careful when sometimes people attribute things to Abu Hanifa, but we can't find it in the early works. Where did they get it from? So, like, let's say, for example, if a person who is living in the 300s or the 200s quoted Abu Hanifa, even though that same particular masala we can't find it from Abu Hanifa, then it's possible that there is an oral transmission of the madhab. Yeah, so Sheikh Suhail Hanif mentioned, he said, it's possible that just like there is a written transmission of the Hanafi madhab, there is also an oral transmission of the Hanafi madhab as well. Alright, so there's two. And the early years could have preserved that oral transmission, like Imam Qudoori, up to Imam Qudoori's time, or even before his time, like Imam Tahawi. They could have preserved. Alright, but then after that it becomes a bit difficult. Like someone who came in the 500s and 600s, to be able to preserve Abu Hanifa's qawl, that becomes quite hard. So he says, وقال ابن المنذر, outside of the Hanafi school, Ibn al-Mundhir, he says, قول أبي حنيفة أبو يوسف ومحمد في سبيل الله والغازي غير الغني. So he even puts Imam Muhammad with Abu Yusuf. وحكى أبو ثور, so Abu Thawr is a non-Hanafi, عن أبي حنيفة أنه الغازي دون الحاج, it's the soldier, and so forth. So he's saying other madhab books have quoted Abu Hanifa being with Imam Abu Yusuf, even though our own books seem to be silent about it. Then near the end he says, ثم وجدت في خزانة الأكمل ما يوافق نقل حول الجماعة, that conforms, agrees with what they said. قالوا في سبيل الله فقراء الغزاة عندنا وعند محمد منقطع الحج. By saying indana, seems as though he's indicating towards Imam Abu Hanifa. Right, so it's very important when we read Hanafi works to be very particular about who's quoting Abu Hanifa in this, because Abu Hanifa is a representation, he is the madhab in essence. Anyway, let's go back to this. So he says, وَعِنْدَ مُحَمَّدْ مُنْقَطِعُ الْحَاجِ لِمَا رُوِيَ, because of a narration he's found. أَنَّ رَجُلًا جَعَلَ بَعِيرًا لَهُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. He made his camel, like he appointed his camel, donated his camel for في سبيل الله. فأمره رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يحمل عليه الحج. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he told him, let the Hajis use it to go Hajj. Yeah, so fi sabilillah over there was used for Hajj. Yeah, so again, this is an example that Imam Muhammad has actually gone towards the meaning because of a narration. This does not mean that Imam Muhammad does not accept that a munqati'ul ghuzat, a soldier, is not from this category. He's not saying that. He's just saying that this is also from this category as well. And we also mentioned about the student as well, if you remember last time. We said the student can also come under this as well, the fi sabilillah. Yeah, why? Because the student is also someone who is clearly in the path of Allah, learning knowledge. Yeah. وَلَا يُصْرَفْ إِلَىٰ أَغْنِيَاءِ الْغُزَاةِ. However, this money must not be given to the rich soldiers. Rich meaning they have nisab عندنا. لأن المصرف هو الفقراء. Because the masraf, meaning where the money is meant to be spent, is fuqara. This is like a general rule that this is where it's supposed to be spent. Now, some of them have actually mentioned, let me show you guys. Okay, so if I go to... So some of them have mentioned those people who, despite having wealth, can be given. So if I go to Radd al-Muhtar, let me show you guys. Okay, so here is Radd al-Muhtar. وفي الرقاب. Okay, so it says وفي سبيل الله وهو المنقطع الغزاة وقيل الحاج وقيل طلبة العلم. Yeah, so some later Hanafis have even extended this now, this fi sabilillah. And this is important for us to understand that fi sabilillah does not just mean Abu Yusuf's qawl of the Haji, or Imam Muhammad's qawl that it refers, Imam Muhammad's qawl the Haji and Abu Yusuf's qawl the soldier. Right? Because this is something which extends to the whole concept of being in the path of Allah. وَفَسَّرَهُ فِي الْبَدَائِ بِجَمِيعِ الْقُرَبِ. So even in Badai Sana, he's actually explained fi sabilillah as being all those acts that bring us close to Allah. Yeah, وَثَمَرَةُ الْإِخْتِلَافِ فِي نَحْوِ الْأَوْقَافِ. But the ikhtilaf will only appear when it comes to awqaf, waqaf issues, meaning like wasiyah. Because if you take the term fi sabilillah to be very generic and you extend it and say applies to anyone in the path of Allah, people will abuse this. What's the whole point then of having all these categories if fi sabilillah covers everything in the whole world? And unfortunately nowadays there are some organizations under the guise of fi sabilillah are taking zakat for things like making films to support Islam, using this money to for usage in building like organizations, buildings for hospitals for people, etc. But these are not, that's not permissible for that, because it's abuse. But you can understand, we're going to look in Bidayah Sanai Nabi as well. That's where they've kind of like taken it from. So if you go over here, وهو منقطع الغزاة الذين عجزوا عن اللحوق, those people who are incapable of joining the Muslim army لفقرهم, because of their poverty, بهلاك النفقة, because of their nafaqa expiring, finishing, or الدابة, or they don't have the means to travel, فتحل لهم الصدقة, zakat is permitted for them, وإن كانوا كاسبين, even if they are capable of earning. إذ الكسب يقعدهم عن الجهاد, because if they were to start working, they wouldn't be able to go for jihad. So the idea is you want to be able to compensate them for not going for work. So قيل الحاج هو منقطع الحاج. Alright, I just want to go to this طلبة العلم part. So he says, if you look at طلبة العلم, he says قيل طلبة العلم كذا في الظاهرية والمرغناني واستبعده السروج. Saruji seems that this is far-fetched. How can a student of knowledge come under this? And his argument basically is that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Quran was revealed, there was no such group of people called Talabatul Ilm. That's his argument is. There was Hajis, there were Ghazis, soldiers, but there was no such category called. But he says, Shurun Bulali has rejected this and says, look, Talabul Ilm is just a concept. There were Sahaba who used to study knowledge. Just because they don't have the name Talabatul Ilm, it doesn't mean that that category doesn't exist. Laysa illa al-istifad. What is Talab al-Ilm? Talab al-Ilm is simply gaining benefit of the ahkam of the deen. So you're gaining knowledge, you're gaining the meaning of the deen. وهل يبلغ طالب رتبة من لازم صحبة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لتلقي الأحكام عنه كأصحاب الصف وأصحاب الصف and all these people. فالتفسير بطالب العلم وجيه خصوصا. This is a really good explanation. Even when you look at Badai, when he says في سبيل جميع القرب فيدخل في كل من سعى في طاعة الله. Everyone who is striving for obedience of Allah falls under في سبيل الله. والسبيل الخيرات إذا كان محتاجا. Yeah, if he's in need of it. Now, like I said to you, we need to be quite careful of using this, otherwise people can abuse the understanding of this. And we already mentioned last week, if you remember, about the student of knowledge being allowed to take zakat even if he's above the nisab. Yeah, even if the individual above the nisab. Okay. Okay, let's just quickly go to Badai Sanai and then. So Badai Sanai. Okay, so it says وأما قوله ففي الرقاب قال بعض أهل العلم معناه في العتق الرقاب ويجوز إعتاق الرقبة وقال عامة الرقاب المكاتبون. Okay, so we discussed that one anyway before. وفي سبيل الله. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, في سبيل الله. So he says في سبيل الله عبارة عن جميع القرب. This is an expression of all the types of قرب. فيدخل فيه كل من سعى في طاعة الله وسبيل الخيرات إذا كان محتاجا. وقال أبو يوسف, Imam Abu Yusuf says no, this is for فقراء الغزاة لأن سبيل الله إذا أطلق في عرف الشرع يراد بذلك. وقال محمد المراد, what's meant by is حاج المنقطع, the one that has cut off supplies, and رجل جاء, and then he gives the example of the hadith. And Shafi says يجوز دفع زكاة الغازي وإن كان غنيا. Imam Shafi says that you're allowed to give it to the soldier even if he's rich. Yeah, so even if a soldier is rich, because the idea is you want to protect Islam, so zakat should be used for protection of Islam, just like in the Amil situation. أما عندنا لا يجوز إلا عند اعتبار حدوث الحاجة. So we say you can't give it to the soldiers unless like there is a dire need for soldiers, that they really need the funds. Okay, واحتج, and then he brings his evidence for him. I just want to go down. وأما استثناء الغازي, he says فمحمول على حال حدوث الحاجة. As for the ghazi, this is in the situation where there is a dire need. وسماه غنين على اعتبار ما كان قبل الحدوث. As in, so you know, this over here says صرف إلى غني, so that there is permissibility. لا تحل صدقة لغني. that some narrations seem to indicate that that a rich person can take it. He's saying that rich can mean that possibly he had the means before this. That's what it could mean. And some say rich can mean he is capable of like working for himself. وَلَهُ مَعَ هَذَا فَضْلُ مِئَتَيْنِ. So he says وَهُوَ أَنْ يَكُونَ غَنِيًّا. A soldier is rich, then تَحْدُثُ لَهُ الْحَاجَةِ, then a need comes for him. بِأَنْ كَانَ لَهُ دَارٌ, he has a house in which he lives, وَمَتَاعٌ, and he has furniture, يَمْتَحِنُهُ, which he uses, وَثِيَابْ يَلْبَسُهَا, وَلَهُ مَعَ ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ مِئَتَيْ دِرْهَمٍ, and he also has an excess of 200 silver coins. حَتَّى لَا تَحِلُّ لَهُ الصَّدَقَةِ. In this situation, zakat is not permitted for him. ثُمَّ يَعْزِمْ عَلى الْخُرُوجِ. Then the next day he decides to go on a journey to fight the enemy. فَيَحْتَاجْ إِلَى آلَاتِ السَّفَرِ. Now he needs tools, weapons, سلاح يستعمله في غزوه, ومركب, vehicle, وخادم, and maybe he needs like a servant to help him. يستعين بخدمته على ما لم يكن محتاج إليه في حال إقامته, which he did not need before. فيجوز أن يؤتى من الصدقات ما يستطيع. So now, because he's got this whole list of needs, now he's allowed to be given in that sense. So even though he has some means at home, التي تحدث في سفر وهو في مقامه غني مما يملكه. In his normal situation, he would be counted as a غني, لأنه غير محتاج في حال إقامته, where he doesn't need this. Yeah, and then he goes on about this idea. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to show you how we have to understand the text when we're reading from other books as well. So he says, لأن المصرف هو الفقراء ولا يصرف إلى أغنياء. It must not be given to the أغنياء, because the zakat is a masraf. It's something to be used for the fuqara. وابن السبيل, and the last one, also Ibn Sabil. Ibn Sabil means the son of the path. Son of a path is an Arabic statement for someone who travels. So can a traveler be given zakat? We say no, unless he needs it. Man kana lahu mal, a person who has mal, fi watanihi, in his homeland, wa huwa fi makan akhar la shay'a lahu fi, whilst he himself is in a land where he possesses nothing. So he's got no access to his funds, basically. So imagine you go to a different country. Let's say you go to New Zealand, and in New Zealand all your money's finished, or you're below the nisab. You've got money at home, but you don't have access to it. So in that case, what happens? You can take zakat. However, the scholars have mentioned, I won't go and look into this, you can look at yourself. So look in Rad al-Muhtar, and look in Bahr al-Ra'iq, and look in Fath al-Qadir, and they'll all say the same thing, which is someone who is a traveler can only take the amount that they need to get home. Right? So they're not like a normal faqir. A normal faqir can take more than the nisab, as much as they need. But the traveler should only take that amount. And some have even said, although this opinion has not been preferred by majority, some have even said, rather than taking zakat, they should borrow money from someone, and then when they get home, pay them back. Although majority say that's going to be very difficult, especially if you come from far away. How are you going to get access to that person and then send them the money? It's going to be quite hard. Nowadays it's possible, but in the olden days it would have been quite difficult. So he says, لا شيء له فيه, so therefore there is nothing for them. Okay, we'll stop there, because the next one is a bit different. Okay, so let's just, if you've got any questions, you can ask over here. And so we talked about today the idea of the amil, the gharim, or the riqab. We said the riqab generally means the mukatab, although others have mentioned that this possibly can include people like freeing captives of war. And the gharim is a person who is in debt. His debts exceed his assets. And some have said that it also includes a person who has borrowed money to people and currently can't get access to that money. And like we said, some Hanafis have extended that to anyone who is in a situation where they can't get access to their money. And so Imam Shafi's opinion also is brought here, indicating that this is something plausible, that someone who is a broker between two tribes and has incurred a large amount of debt to try and finish this this dispute between them. Fi sabilillah, like we said, this statement, fi sabilillah, generally means just any path, but when it's used in a mutlaq state, it refers to war. That's why Abu Yusuf has taken it to mean a soldier who is unable to get access to his funds or does not have enough funds to go for war. And Imam Muhammad, on the other hand, he takes it to mean munqati al-hajj as well. Like it can apply to the munqati al-hajj as well. And other Hanafis have said it can also apply to talabat al-ilm as well. So the concept of the fi sabilillah, like Badai Sanai mentions, that this is the sabilullah, there are many ways of sabilullah. So as long as there is a strong need for it, then they can take it. Okay, we'll stop there. Alright guys, take care inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.